Shalom, this is Jay Shear sharing what I know about the Bible, and this is talking about the last days timeline, part 2. So I already did part 1 where we talked about some of the signs that we should see. I also have done this before previously. If you're on some of my Facebook, you'll see some of the things I did around COVID-19 when it first broke out, to kind of let people know where we are in timeline, since a lot of people was wondering. So now I've decided to make a video out of it and put it in smaller parts. If you ever heard of the same lecture I did before, so now I've broken it out so I can talk a little slower through it, since it's not all in one day, and break it up in parts so I can, kind of give you more information around it. So with that said, when we talk about part 2, and in part 1, we talked about the signs to understand last day prophecy. We got to basically understand some of the signs that was given to us, and this is one big sign that Yahushua gave us to tell us when his return will happen, right? He told us that the sun will be dark, the moon won't give us light, and the stars will fall. And you can find that prophecy, as we talked about in the first video, in Mark 13:24 through 26. And it says, "But in those days after that tribulation, the sun shall be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars of heaven shall fall, and the powers are in heaven shall be shaken. And then shall they see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great power and glory." So, as we talked about even in part 1, about the prophecy that Peter talked about right after the Feast of Weeks, or the day Feast of Pentecost, Day of Pentecost, some Christians call it. So he basically talked about the prophecy of Joel 2:32 being fulfilled, and that was around 35 AD. And we know that this prophecy about the sun, the moon, and the stars, Yahushua gave us about future times, right? So that was in Mark 13:24 through 26. So we know that's the future. We know we haven't seen those signs yet. So between 35 AD, where Peter spoke about Joel and that last day prophecy being fulfilled, all the way into the future, we know we have to be somewhere in between that, right? So that's what's the basis of our minimum time and our maximum time on our biblical timeline of the last days. So with that said, as we go through there, we're going to be filling in some of this middle ground in between this, so we can figure out where we are today. So in Luke 21:12 through 19, there's a prophecy that Yahushua continues to talk about, and it's very important to understand the words that he's using here, because he says, "But before all these things," right? So that's a sign that some bad things are going to happen, but he said before these things are happening, he's kind of going backwards and telling you, okay, this is what's going to happen in the end, but before these things happen, there are some stepping points, some milestones that has to take place to get us there. Just to read it, before all these things, they will lay their hands on you and will persecute you, delivering you to the synagogues and prisons, bring you before kings and governors for my name's sake. It will lead to an opportunity for your testimony. So make up your minds not to prepare beforehand to defend yourselves. For I will give you utterance and wisdom, which none of your opponents will be able to resist or refute. But you will be betrayed even by parents and brothers and relatives and friends, and they will put some of you to death, and you will be hated by all because of my name. Yet not a hair of your head will perish, but your endurance you will gain your life." So right there, he gives us some signs right there of things that are important to understand. Those milestones about to take place. So one of the things that you can easily see, a lot of people use this prophecy for saying that this prophecy right here is going to be in our future. You see a lot of the last day end times movies where you see people being persecuted and all that stuff that's going place forth in those movies, but not saying that's not going to happen. There could be a big persecution. But this prophecy that Yahushua is talking about, we know this is in our past. See, when Yahushua is speaking, the Messiah, he's speaking about at that present time their future, right? And doesn't mean everything that he spoke about during that time, around 30 AD, everything he's talking about doesn't mean it's all in our future now in 2020. Some of these things could have happened in our past, which could still be Yahushua's and the disciples' future, right? Between 30 AD and 2020, we know that's a lot of stuff, a lot of years that have passed by, and a lot of this stuff could have already taken place, showing us even closer to where we are in this timeline. And the reason why I say that this happened in our past, if we just read and basically look at some of the clues that he's given us, we can easily, I feel like, rule out some of this stuff of it happening in our futures. One big key is right there in verse 12 where it says, delivering you to the synagogues. So, do you think in the last days that we will be delivered into synagogues? So, in the America tradition, in the America movies that we have, I've never seen those end time movies where they take people and take them to the synagogues for persecution. Because number one, that would be anti-Semitic in today's standards, right? So they don't want you to think that the Jews who go, Jewish people that basically worship in synagogues, right, that they will be the ones that's persecuting everybody, right? So we know they're never going to show that in the movie, especially nowadays. But also, if you're an Israelite, you got to also understand some of this prophecy, right? Because it says it's going to be deliver you to the synagogue. So if the Israelite are the true Jews, as some people believe, as I believe, then how can they take you to? How can we, that's doing right, going to be taken to synagogues, especially with us not being the ones that are even recognized as being the Israelites, right? Because it later on does say that in verse 16, but you will be betrayed even by your parents and your brothers and your relatives and your friends, and they will put. So this is basically, he's talking to who? He's talking to his disciples. And what ethnicity are his disciples? They are Israelites. They are Judeans, Jews, right? So he's saying that your family members, Israelites, will be the ones that will be persecuting you and even put you to death, right? So now we can look at a new understanding because we have woke up to who our identity is. So we can basically put this in the proper perspective to fit it within our timeline, right? So so we know this is not about a future church or future Christian church. He's talking to Israelites during this time to make this point, right? So that's very important to understand. But if you don't believe it yet, you'll hopefully by the time we're finished with this one, you'll at least understand. So when have people been taken to the synagogues, right, and persecuted? Let's just read in Acts 6:9-12. But some men, from which was called the synagogue of the freedmen, including both Cyrenes and Alexandrians, and some of the Cilicia and Asia, rose up and argued with who? Stephen. But they were unable to cope with the wisdom and the spirit, the Ruach, with which he was speaking. Wait a minute, doesn't that sound like the prophecy we just read? How they won't be able to offend or go against what you're saying, right? Then they secretly induced men to say, we have heard him speak blasphemous words against Moses and against Yah. And they stirred up the people, the elders and the scribes, and they came up to him and dragged him away and brought him before the council. So who's the council is talking about there? So we know the council was talking about the council of the Sanhedrin, or it has to be Israelite, Jew, Judean, composed of them, right? Because he's basically going against the synagogue, right? These are the people from the synagogue, I'm sorry, that's basically doing that. So they're persecuting them. So let's continue to read later on in the story what happens to them, right? So I'm starting at Acts 7:54. It says, now when they heard this, they were cut to the quick, and they began gnashing their teeth at him. But being full of the Ruach HaKodesh, Holy Spirit, he gazed intently into heaven and saw the glory of Yah and Yahusha standing at the right hand of Yah. And he said, behold, I see the heavens open up, and the Son of Man standing at the right hand of Yah. But they cried out with a loud voice and covered their ears and rushed at him with one impulse. When they had driven him out of the city, they began stoning him. So what are they doing? They're killing him. And who are these people who are killing him? They are his relatives. Why? Because they are Israelites. And even more so, they are good chance that they were Judeans or Jews, right? From the same tribe of Judah, because we know that the 10 tribes were as they say, lost, but at least taken to captivity. So this could either be Benjamin, Judah, and the Levites. It could be, some of the other tribes that actually came by, as we saw with Anna and other people. But these are the people who are killing him, his relative, his blood. So when they have driven him out of the city, they began stoning him, and the witnesses laid aside their robes at the feet of a young man named Saul. They went on stoning Stephen as he called on Yahuwah and said, Yahusha, receive my spirit. Then falling on his knees, he cried out with a loud voice, Yahuwah, do not hold this sin against them. Having said this, he fell asleep. So let's talk about this again, right? Luke 21. But before all these things, they will lay their hands on you and will persecute you, delivering you to synagogues and prisons, bringing you before kings and governors for my sake. It will lead to an opportunity for your testimony. Didn't he lead a big testimony here that he spoke to him? Was long. He wasn't like saving this. Basically, it says, so make up your minds not to prepare beforehand to defend yourself. He didn't have time to prepare for this. He didn't know this was going to happen. But he said something to the fact that they were gnashing at their teeth at him. So he must have, as we know in the word, he put it on them, right? And they could not refute it, right? For I will give you utterance and wisdom which none of your opponents will be able to resist or refute. But you will be betrayed even by parents and brothers and relatives and friends. So I'm sure some of these people were his friends at one point before he received Yahushua HaMashiach, right? He was probably their friends, probably doing everything. They're going to the synagogue on a regular basis and doing everything else. And they will put some of you to death. And what happened to Stephen? They killed him. And you'll be hated because of my name. Why did they kill Stephen? Because of the name of Yahushua, right? HaMashiach. So, yet now the hair on your head will perish, but by your endurance you will gain your lives. So, we just talked about Stephen, right? Stoning. Was there any other cases in the Bible that points to this, right? He said, not only the synagogues, but also prisons, right? And it's because of his namesake. So let's talk about another time, right, with Peter. In Acts 5, and starting at verse 14, and believers were the more added to Yahuwah, multitudes of men and women. In verse 17, then the high priest rose up. Who's the high priest? High priests are part of the Israelites, right? And all they that were with him, which is the sect of the Sadducees. Now it says Sadducees, so there's something going on there, but I won't hit that right now. And were filled with indignation, and laid their hands on the apostles. Didn't I say they would lay their hands on them? And put them in the common prison. So they were not only put in the synagogues, they were also placed in prisons. But the angel of Yahuwah by night opened the prison doors and brought them forth and said, Go stand and speak in the temple to the people all the words of this life. So what is that? They're going to basically share their testimony. They'll testify and be witnesses, right? So going to verse 21, and when they heard that they had entered to the temple early in the morning and taught, but the high priest came and they that were with him and called the council. That's kind of like a governing, right? Okay, governing of the, so maybe that's not the same as governor, but it is some type of governing board, right? Together in all the senate of the children of Israel. So these are Israelites attacking who? Israelites, their relatives, and sent to the prison to have them brought. But when the officer came and found them not in the prison, they returned and told, saying, The prison truly found we shut with all safety, and the keeper standing without before the doors. But when we had opened, we found no man within. So once again, Israelites going against Israelites, their own relatives, their own family members, and throwing them in prison, laying hands on them, right? Verse 24, Now when the high priest and the captain of the temple and the chief priests heard these things, they doubt of them whereunto this would grow. Then came one and told them, saying, Behold, the men whom ye put in prison are standing in the temple and teaching the people. Then went the captain with the officers and brought them without violence, for they feared the people, lest they should be stoned. And when they had brought them, they sat them before the council. And the high priest asked them, saying, Did not we straitly command you that ye shall not teach in this name? And behold, ye have filled Jerusalem with your doctrines, and intend to bring this man's blood upon us. So, right there, for his name, they were hated. They were hated by their family members, their relatives, their people, their kinsmen. They're, we're Gullah, if you know about the Gullah people our people, the Gullah people in South Carolina, Georgia area. If you know about them, that's what it means. It means kinsman, redeemer. So they didn't redeem their own, right? So after this, they basically talked to everybody, wanted to kill them, but they didn't. They decided not to. So then in Acts 5, Peter witnessed to Israel. Verse 29 even talks about it. It says, Then Peter and the other apostles answered and said, We ought to obey Yah rather than men. Yah of our fathers raised us up Yahusha, whom ye slew and hanged on a tree. Him that Yah exalted with his right hand to be a prince and savior, for to give repentance to who? To Israel, and forgiveness of sins. And we are his witnesses of these things, and so is also the Ruach HaKodesh, who Yah have given to them that obey him. So right there, they're giving the testimony, they're witnessing, they're without being prompted, they're just doing it, right? They didn't have time to get a sermon together. They're impromptu. It's basically speaking in whatever the Holy Spirit, the Ruach HaKodesh, is giving them, right? In verse 40, and to him they agreed, and when they had called the apostles and beaten them, put their hands on them, they commanded that they should not speak in the name of Yahusha, and let them go. And when they departed from the presence of the council, rejoicing that they were counted worthy to suffer shame for who? For his name. And daily in the temple and in every house they ceased not to teach and preach Yahusha HaMashiach. So let's go back to Luke 21. What does it say? It talks about how they will be delivering you to the synagogues and prisons. They will be persecuted. Their hands will be placed on them. Bring before governors and kings, right? And they gave a testimony, right? So once again, we see the same thing with the relatives and how they hate it because of Yahusha's name, right? So let's see keywords here. Kings and governors. So maybe you don't think that the council of the Israelites was the Sanhedrin, and those people are not enough. So let's see who went to speak to people of kings and governors for his name's sake, right? Without preparing before. So let's talk about Acts 24. Paul goes before the governor, right? So in Acts 24, verse 1, and after 5 days, Ananias the high priest descended with the elders and with a certain orator named Tertullus, who informed the governor, it says the governor, actually the word governor, against Paul. And when he was called forth, Tertullus began to accuse him, saying, seeing that by thee we enjoyed great quietness, and that very worthy deeds are done unto this nation by thy providence, blah, blah, blah. And then you get to verse 5, it even talks about who they call Paul. For we have found this man a pestilent fellow, a mover of sedition among all the Jews throughout the world. So all the Judeans, all the Israelites, he's saying that this is a ringleader. This is a person that causes trouble among our own people. And a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes, right? So he's the ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. So who's the sect of the Nazarene? Yahusha the Nazarene. So they call him a Nazarene, and it says it's basically fulfill that as part of prophecy. So verse 24 then goes on, talks about, and after certain days when Felix came with his wife Drusilla, which was a Jewess, he sent for Paul and heard him concerning the faith in Mashiach, and as he reasoned of righteousness, temperance, and judgment to come, Felix trembled. So he couldn't refute it and answer, go thy way for this time. He said, get on out of here. When I have convenient season, I will call for you. He didn't know what to say. He's like, get out of me. I don't have no response. He trembled before him, right? But in verse 27, it talks about, but after 2 years, Porcius Festus came into Felix's room, and Felix, willing to shew the Jews a pleasure, left Paul bound. So he left him, in prison, in a state of bondage, that he couldn't go. So it says that they will be thrown in prisons, right? And they will go before governors and kings, right? So we got the governor here that Paul basically went before and spoke about this message, and they put hands on him, and they trembled and could not respond. But he also went before king, right? Kings with an S. In Acts 25, 11, 12 says, for if I be an offender or have committed anything worthy to death, I refuse not to die. But if there be none of these things whereof these accuse me, no man may deliver me unto them. I appeal unto Caesar. Who is Caesar? The emperor. The emperor was Caesar, right? Then Festus, when he had conferred with the council, answered, hast thou appealed unto Caesar? And unto Caesar shalt thou go. So the Caesar during that time was Emperor Claudius. So it's picture Claudius there. But he appealed to him. The Bible doesn't actually talk about him actually going before him, but something had to happen, for him to go. And some tradition says he was killed, some tradition said he was set free, but either way, he appealed and had to go before him before his death. And in Acts 26, verse 2, and then I'll read 8, it says, I think myself happy, King Agrippa, because I shall answer for myself this day before thee, touching all the things whereof I am accused of the Jews. So basically he's saying I'm being accused by my own people, because we know that Paul was a Benjamite, right? He came from the tribe of Benjamin, and Benjamin was the tribe that actually stayed back, was a part of Judah, and those who were basically called the Jews, right? So now he's talking to King Agrippa, and he's speaking before what the prophecy say, a king. Yahusha said that he will talk before the governors and kings. He's speaking before a king of the Jews, and he spoke about, he appealed to the king of the Roman government, so the emperor. So there in Acts 26 verse 28, it says, then Agrippa said unto Paul, almost thou persuadest me to be, it says a Christian there, but if he's from the sect of Nazarene, You would think he also will say Nazarenes, but depending upon what their understanding was at that time. But yet you hear, him speaking before kings and governors. So let's go back to the prophecy. What does it say? They will lay your hands on you, will persecute you, deliver to the synagogues and prisons before kings and governors for my name's sake. So didn't that fit Paul there? And then he give a testimony when they could not they could not basically resist or refute, and wasn't it his own relatives that was doing this, who were of the same Israelite tribe or nation of people, right? And then later on, as one tradition has it, wasn't he put to death because of it, right? So what else? So Paul was standing before them, right? Basically testifying, but he didn't only testify against them, he also was one who saw it firsthand, right, in his own message, because he not only testifies as Paul, he also testifies as Saul before he converted. So in Acts 26:9, we see where he says, I verily thought with myself that I ought to do many things contrary to the name of Yahushua of Nazareth. So he's saying he was basically going against Yahushua, right? The Messiah. He was going against them. Which thing I also did in Jerusalem, and many of the saints that I shut up in prison. So it goes to prison again, right? So he fought against the name of Yahushua, and he even shut up people in prison, having received authority from the chief priests. And when they were put to death, once again, they were killed. They were being persecuted, thrown in jail for the name of Yahushua. He then says, I gave my voice to him, and I punished them off in every synagogue. Synagogue right there, not only the prisons, also in the synagogues, and compelled them to blasphemy, and being exceedingly mad against them, I persecuted them. So isn't that also part of the prophecy, all wrapped up together in Paul's testimony right there of what he was doing to the people, even unto strange cities, as it ends there? So that helps us with our timeline here, right? So we know in 35 AD, we first know that Peter talks about the fulfillment of Joel, the prophecy there, where it says believers persecution prophecy by Yahushua in Luke 21. Then after that, we know there's something that happens. Then we know that the future happens when he returns. So hopefully this helps with the last days timeline part 2. So next we'll be going into even more information about Yahushua's prophecy. Yeah, he was basically telling the disciples when these last days events will happen and what will happen in reference to those things that will lead up to it. So hopefully this been helpful to you. And as you know how this YouTube site works, the more you like a certain video, the more I put out. I just put out some other information around the Israelite history, which we're going to talk about basically how our history from slavery or even pre-slavery to slavery, and there's a lot of events that happened during the time of slavery, right after the time of slavery, right after we were released, and even as a lot of these what we call Christian churches were built, there's a lot of Israelite history that leads up to all of what they call now African American history, which is truly who we should be called the American Israelites history. So if you like this video, if you like that video, there's still also the video about the Black Messiah, proving that he was black based upon the Bible. I think we're on part 3 for that. So, if more likes to get towards a certain video, the more I do. I think this one and another one tied. So that's the reason why I'm doing this one now. So I hope this has been very helpful. Please share it. And this is not for my likes, and I don't monetize the site or anything like that. I'm doing this so you can basically easily break down information and share it with your family and your loved ones, your friends, before this timeline is completed. It's a way to easily witness if you don't understand and can't say everything. I'm trying to slowly break it down for anybody who has a Bible background to easily understand this without getting lost or getting caught up in some of the them trying to tear down Israelites by trying to associate everybody as the same thing, which hopefully you saw the one I just put out about President Obama's cousin being, leader of the black rabbi, black Jews, even endorsed by, the people in Israel. So there's a lot of information that's there, even though I'm not part of that, but there's a lot of information that's out there, but you have to make sure you take the time to learn. And hopefully this will help you to get there. All right, well, shalom.